This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As a new 72-hour truce in Gaza appears to be holding, we turn now to part two of our interview with Noam Chomsky, the world-renowned political dissident, linguist, and Institute Professor Emeritus at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he's taught for more than 50 years. He's authored over 100 books, including most recently Gaza in Crisis, Reflections on Israel's War Against the Palestinians, which he wrote with Professor Ilan Pappé. I spoke to Noam Chomsky on Thursday, in the middle of the initial 72-hour ceasefire. I started by asking him about U.S. media coverage of the conflict by playing him a clip from a recent CBS Face the Nation show with host Bob Schieffer.
In the Middle East, the Palestinian people find themselves in the grip of a terrorist group that has embarked on a strategy to get its own children killed in order to build sympathy for its cause, a strategy that might actually be working, at least in some quarters. Last week, I found a quote of many years ago by Golda Meir, one of Israel's early leaders, which might have been said yesterday. "We can forgive the Arabs for killing our children," she said, "but we can never forgive them for forcing us to kill their children."
That was CBS journalist Bob Schieffer. Noam Chomsky, can you respond?
Well, we don't really have to listen to CBS because we can listen directly to the Israeli propaganda agencies, which he's quoting. It's a shameful moment for U.S. media when it insists on being subservient to the grotesque propaganda agencies of a violent, aggressive state. As for the comment itself, the Israeli comment, the propaganda comment, which he quoted, I guess maybe the best comment about that was made by the great Israeli journalist Amira Haas, who just described it as sadism masked as compassion. It's about the right characterization.
I wanted to also ask you about the UN's role and the U.S. vis-a-vis as well the United States. This is the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay, criticizing the U.S. for its role in the Israeli assault on Gaza.
They have not only provided the heavy weaponry, which is now being used by Israel in Gaza, but they've also provided almost $1 billion in providing the iron domes to protect Israelis from the rocket attacks, but no such protection has been provided to Gazans against the shelling. So I am reminding the United States that it's a party to international humanitarian law and human rights law.
That was Navi Pillay, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Noam, on Friday, this was the point where the death toll for Palestinians had exceeded Operation Cast Lead. It had passed 1,400. President Obama was in the White House, and he held a news conference. He didn't raise the issue of Gaza in the news conference, but he was immediately asked about Gaza. And he talked about, he reaffirmed the U.S. support for Israel, said that the resupply of ammunition was happening, that the $220 million would be going for an expanded Iron Dome.
Israel has a right to defend itself from rocket attacks that terrorize the Israeli people. There's no country on earth that can be expected to live under a daily barrage of rockets. There's no country on earth that can be expected to live under a daily barrage of rockets. And I'm proud that the Iron Dome system that Americans helped Israel develop and fund has saved many Israeli lives.
But then the weekend took place, yet another attack on a UN shelter on one of the schools where thousands of Palestinians had taken refuge, and a number of them were killed, including children. And even the U.S. then joined with the UN in criticizing what Israel was doing. Can you talk about what the U.S. has done, and if you really do see a shift right now?
Well, let's start with what the U.S. has done. and continue with the comments with the UN Human Rights Commission. Right at that time, at the time of the quote you gave over the radio, that you gave before, there was a debate in the Human Rights Commission about whether to have an investigation, no action, just an investigation of what had happened in Gaza, an investigation of possible violations of human rights. Possible is kind of a joke. It was passed with one negative vote. Guess who? Obama voted against an investigation while he was giving these polite comments. That's action. The United States continues to provide, as Pillai pointed out, the critical, the decisive support for the atrocities. When what's called Israeli jet planes bomb defenseless targets in Gaza, that's U.S. jet planes with Israeli pilots, and the same with the high-tech munition and so on and so forth. So this is, again, sadism masked as compassion. Those are the actions.
What about opinion in the United States? Can you talk about the role that it plays? We saw some certainly remarkable changes. MSNBC had the reporter Ayman Maldin, who had been at Al Jazeera, very respected. He had been together with Shireen Tadros in 2008, the only Western reporters in Gaza covering Operation Cast Lead. Tremendous experience in the area, and he was pulled out by MSNBC. But because there was a tremendous response against this with, I think what was trending was let Ayman report, he was then brought back in. So there was a feeling that people wanted to get a sense of what was happening on the ground. There seemed to be some kind of opening. Do you sense a difference in the American population, how the attitude toward what's happening in Israel and the occupied territories?
Very definitely. It's been happening over some years, and it's there was a kind of a point of inflection. It increased after Cast Lead, which horrified many people, and it's happening again now. You can see it everywhere. Take, say, the New York Times. The New York Times devoted a good part of their op-ed page to a Gaza diary a couple of days ago, which was heartrending and eloquent. They've had strong op-eds condemning extremist Israeli policies. That's new, and it reflects something that's happening in the country. You can see it in polls, especially among young people. If you look at the polling results, the population, say, below 30 roughly, by now has shifted substantially. You can see it on college campuses. I mean, I see it personally. I've been giving talks on these things for almost 50 years. I used to have police protection, literally, even at my own university. The meetings were broken up violently, enormous protests. Within the past roughly decade, that's changed substantially. By now, the Palestinian solidarity is maybe the biggest issue on campus. Huge audiences. You hardly get a hostile question. That's a tremendous change. That's strikingly among younger people, but they become older. However, there's something we have to remember about the United States. It's not a democracy. It's a plutocracy. There's study after study that comes out in mainstream academic political science, which shows what we all know or ought to know, that political decisions are made by a very small sector of extreme privilege and wealth, concentrated capital. For most of the population, their opinions simply don't matter in the political system. They're essentially disenfranchised. I'll give the details if you like, but that's basically the story. Now, public opinion can make a difference. Even in dictatorships, the public can't be ignored. And in a partially democratic society like this, even less so. So ultimately, this will make a difference. And how long ultimately is, well, that's up to us. We've seen it before. Take, say, the East Timor case, which I mentioned. For 25 years, the United States strongly supported the vicious Indonesian invasion and massacre, virtual genocide. It was happening right through 1999 as the Indonesian atrocities increased and escalated. After Dili, the capital city, was practically evacuated after Indonesian attacks, the U.S. was still supporting it. Finally, in mid-September 1999, under considerable international and also domestic pressure, Clinton quietly told the Indonesian generals, it's finished. And they had said they'd never leave. They said, this is our territory. They pulled out within days and allowed a UN peacekeeping force to enter without Indonesian military resistance. Well, that's a dramatic indication of what can be done. South Africa is a more complex case, but has similarities, and there are others. Sooner or later, it's possible, and that's really up to us, that domestic pressure will compel the U.S. government to join the world on this issue, and that will be a decisive change.
MIT professor Noam Chomsky. After break, we'll talk about BDS, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement.